Hi, I'm Tom Parkin, Managing Director of the Workers' Health and Safety Centre. We're Ontario's designated health and safety training organization, delivering a wide range of classrooms and now virtual class training courses. This webinar is one in a series that we've developed to help you stay safe, make your workplace safe during this pandemic. And today's topic is how to use masks and respirators for worker protection. Ready to start? All right, what we're going to look at is masks and respirators with respect to the hierarchy of controls. We're going to look at them with respect to the transmission routes of this virus. What do the healthcare directives to hospitals, long-term care facilities, ambulance services, and others, what do they say about mask and respirator use? And next, what does that mean for us who are outside of the healthcare sector? What can we take from that? And finally, what are the different types of masks and respirators, and what are their performance? Now, the Occupational Health and Safety Act says an employer must take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of a worker. And the circumstances here are this pandemic, COVID-19. The best method for controlling a hazard is at the source. Closest to the source is best. An example of source controls include isolation of a patient, a resident, or yourself while working at home. Physical distancing, maintaining that 2-meter perimeter. Controls along the path are the next best option, and they include strategies such as supplements. Controls of the worker should only be used as a supplement to other controls, or if other controls are not possible. Now, the virus that is causing COVID-19, we know that it can infect through inhaled virus-laden respiratory droplets. But controversy exists whether the virus can survive on aerosols and be transmitted by an airborne route. So what's the difference between an aerosol and a respiratory drop? Well, mostly size. Viruses travel on something. An aerosol is ultra-fine, 5 microns or less. A droplet from a sneeze or a cough is larger, 10 microns or more. Now, a micron is also called a micrometer, is 1/1000th of a millimeter. And just for reference, plastic wrap is about 10 microns. So we're talking about things that are very small. Now we see the problem here that larger respiratory droplets that carry the virus do fall out of the air fairly quickly. But if virus can continue to live on aerosolized particles, they can stay floating in the air for a long time and float around the workplace into other locations. The Ontario Chief Medical Officer of Health has the power to issue directives. These are directives to the employer, the owners, the operators of the facilities. They're not directly on workers mostly, but they are to ensure that employers carry out these things, including providing personal protective equipment to workers. There are 5 directives, and some of them relate to masks and respirators, so let's touch on those. These directives are for healthcare only, but they tell us in healthcare when surgical masks are being required, what is the situations when N95 respirators are being required, and understanding this can help us understand what taking every precaution reasonable looks like outside of healthcare. So we're going to review these directives by their date order, not necessarily their number. Directive number 1 came on March the 30th, and it said that surgical masks were required for interactions with suspected, presumed, or confirmed patients, and an N95 respirator to be used if an aerosol-generating medical procedure was expected. Now, an aerosol-generating medical procedure, there are many types, but the most common example would be intubation or extubation, putting a breathing tube in or taking it out. And during these medical procedures, a lot of aerosolized particles can be emitted from the patient into the air. And because they're small aerosols, not just droplets, but smaller, they can float in the air, they can linger in the air, they can move throughout the workplace. Directive number 4 came the same day, and it's identical. It's aimed at ambulance services and paramedics. The surgical or procedure mask is to be used with suspected, presumed, or confirmed cases, while the N95 to be used if there's an expectation that there's going to be a aerosol generating medical procedure. Directive 5 came 10 days later and had some shifts in position. It continued to require surgical masks for interactions with suspected, presumed, or confirmed cases in hospitals, but now required surgical masks in long-term care at all times. Also, now an N95 was required to be available in far more situations for workers, not just in aerosol generating procedures, but they do remain mandatory during an aerosol generating medical procedure. And the directive number 3 echoes that take for people working in long-term care homes, wear a surgical mask at all times. Okay, so how can these health and safety directives help us outside of healthcare take every reasonable precaution? Well, remember, because of asymptomatic infection, we need to presume anyone could be infected. Asymptomatic transmission just means that a person can be infected, but they don't have any symptoms. They don't appear to be sick. They don't show any signs of the sickness. So we can't presume just because someone's not sick, doesn't seem to be sick, that they're not infected. And yesterday, in fact, the chief medical officer of health in Alberta said that they tested all of the workers at one meatpacking plant where there'd been an outbreak and found that a third of the workers who tested positive had no symptoms. So what's the difference between respirators and masks? Well, let's look at surgical masks first. They're not fitted, air can go around them. They do filter out particulates and droplets. They do block many of your respiratory droplets from escaping into the work environment that you're in. And here's what they look like. There's many different kinds and made by different manufacturers. A surgical mask won't create a seal to your face. It's not totally fitted, but how you put them on still does matter. This little presentation here, steps 1, 2, 3, is good. And this presentation will be posted on our website afterward, and you can take a look at how it's saying that you can optimize a surgical mask for protection. Now, an N95 is a respirator mask, and there's a significant difference in performance, and this is what they look like. An N95 respirator is manufactured by a company that holds a license authorized by Health Canada. Medical grade N95s are able to be fitted to the wearer to ensure a tight seal all around. And that tight seal is important in their ability to filter 95% of particles with a diameter of 0.3 microns. Remember, we were saying that an aerosol might be 5 microns or less, so this is 0.3. So these are strong protection against an aerosol if it's carrying a virus. These are certified by the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety, NIOSH, in the United States. They have an approval number and expiry date. The most common respirator that we see is the N95, but there are others to other standards. NIOSH is the US standard, but there are other countries that have same standards and they function with the same protection. And we are seeing this in workplaces now because our country and our companies are purchasing N95 and N95 equivalents from all around the world. They offer the same function and protection, but they look different. Here's some of them here. Now, N95s are often used before this pandemic in non-healthcare workplaces. They provide this protection is the same protection for filtering as the medical N95. They are not tested though against a forceful spray of liquid, such as a spurt of blood that you might happen in a surgery. Now, N95s are designed for one-time use, and they're providing protection for up to 8 hours. Reuse is not recommended, but in times of scarcity, they may be necessary. Respirators can be rotated to extend their life, and you could also help them stay intact longer by using a plastic face shield to stop liquids or other things from soiling them or deteriorating them in any way. To reuse, respirators must be put on and taken off carefully to avoid contamination both inside and outside. Allowed to dry long enough so that the virus is no longer viable. That's considered 72 hours to be safe. Stored in a breathable container, such as a paper bag. Respirators should not be shared between workers, and workers by law must have an N95 fit tested for them by a qualified person before first use. When reusing, a seal check needs to be done each time. N95 respirators and equivalents also have expiry dates, and generally they shouldn't be used past them because the filtering and the fit can be compromised. But again, given the shortage, Health Canada says N95s can be used beyond an expiry date if the straps are still intact and in good condition, there's no visible damage to the respirator itself, it's not soiled or wet, and the respirator can still form a seal to your face. That's what gives it a lot of its power. Fit testing is different from a seal check. Let's just emphasize that. Fit testing must be done by a qualified person to ensure the respirator filters the 95% of 0.3 micron microorganisms that may be in the air. Fit tests must be performed before the respirator is worn for the first time. And the seal check is done each time the N95 is used thereafter. You got to make sure that the respirator continues to fit properly and there's no leakage. If there is, it should be thrown out. Now, some people are making and using homemade cloth masks. They can't be fit tested and they don't provide a secure seal to the face. The ability to filter small respiratory droplets is unproven because, of course, it's very dependent upon the material that it's made out of. Health Canada says that these masks are not proven to protect the person wearing the mask, and there's not a substitute for increased workplace ventilation, distancing, isolation, hand hygiene, etc., but they are useful. They should be used during your visits to the store. They should be used where you're going out for a period and you can't maintain that constant 2-meter perimeter. It lowers the amount of respiratory droplets you put into that store's air during your brief visit of maybe 20 minutes or an hour at most. Your homemade mask captures some of your respiratory droplets and it prevents them from entering the workplace. And other people's homemade masks do the same. So together, homemade masks can reduce exposures for the workers who are there in that workplace, who are there for a whole shift, not just the 15 or 20 minutes you might be there. Customers can be required to wear a mask of some sort. But caution, remember, for a worker doing an entire shift in this circumstance, where you're continuously exposed to people within the 2-meter perimeter, it's not a replacement. It shouldn't be considered a replacement for a surgical mask or an N95. And don't forget, other controls higher up the hierarchy are important. Ventilation, disinfecting, hand hygiene, etc. Got to keep those going if you're working close with others and the public. So N95 respirators and surgical masks are required for healthcare workers, and the same masks can protect workers in other industries where 2 meters is not possible. But there remains this outstanding question of whether aerosol transmission is a concern outside of healthcare. We talked about those aerosol generating medical procedures, but there's this question of whether the aerosols can be generated outside of strictly medical procedures in a workplace, in a packing house, in a long-term care facility where there's none of those procedures being undertaken. This is a matter for debate right now. But occupations that are in close or regular contact with the public may benefit from an N95. And remember, the legal duty is to take all precautions reasonable in the circumstance. So let's look at a couple of examples here. 10 Pearson Airport taxi or limo drivers are dead because of a COVID-19 infection. Obviously, in their vehicles, they can't maintain the 2 meters. There's recirculation, or there may be recirculation of air rather than ventilation of air. And there's no shield, there's no plexiglass between the driver and passenger as we might have in, say, grocery stores. So Should an employer be required to provide N95s to these workers? Well, what does taking all precautions in the circumstance mean? Here's another example. We've got in the middle, a worker doing cable installation tech. Now, this person may work alone, outside a lot, and encounters nobody during the course of the day while working. Maybe this person goes inside of establishments, a business or a house, but nobody's there. And if that's the case, at most, if somebody was recently there, they might want to have a surgical mask. But in general, a worker is outside working on his own, not sharing the truck with somebody else, doesn't need a mask. Case 3, what about a childcare worker in close contact with children?
What is your child's name?
So some childcare workers have contracted COVID-19, and certainly, at a minimum, they would require surgical masks. And again, this question of aerosols remains open. Aerosols are controlled by the N95s. Thanks for joining this webinar. We've talked about the routes of transmission, directives, laws, types of masks, pretty high-level stuff, and I hope we've made it down to earth and useful for you. Here's a poll, I hope you'll answer, to get your feedback. Because of COVID-19, we're not offering our usual classes classes with people in a room together, but we are offering this range of virtual classes. You might be particularly interested in this one on our new module, The Hazards of COVID-19. You'll also find some pretty valuable information on our website, which has information for specific workers in specific occupations and industries and what kind of precautions might be useful to them. Okay, so let's take some questions. I can see that there's some questions coming, and let's start with this one. Okay, my employer is having difficulty securing PPE such as masks and gloves. What is the responsibility in this situation? Okay, well, taking all precautions in the circumstances could be interpreted to say, well, if I can't get something, then I can't provide it. That's true. But we've done the research, and it seems that you can still buy a lot of PPE, including N95s, on big mail house and order inventory places like Amazon and others. The pharmacies don't have it, and if you go to some of these online retailers, as an individual, you won't be able to buy it. But if you're a business and you provide your registered business number, you can obtain it for your workers. So that's something to, if your employer isn't aware of that, something to tell them about. Here's another question. I work in a restaurant preparing food for takeout, and I wear a mask. How often should I be changing it? Well, surgical and procedure masks are for one-time use, so they should be getting rid of at the end of a shift. But if your mask gets soiled or wet during your shift, get rid of it and use a new one. And also, don't forget, a mask is no replacement for other controls higher up the hierarchy. If you can keep the 2 meters distancing, do it. If you can increase the ventilation, do it. Of course, maintain the hand hygiene, maintain the cleaning and disinfecting. All right, I work as a 911 operator for the local emergency response. The people I work with, the paramedics, firefighters, are wearing N95. Should I be wearing one? Okay, well, I'm going to assume you're working inside and you're in an office location of some sort. If you can maintain the 2 meters of distance, that's obviously good, and you should probably be wearing a surgical mask at a minimum. But remember, for the directive for ambulance drivers still talks about aerosols, and as far as we understand, aerosols are mostly focused for medical situations. So may not require an N95, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do other things. Remember, keep the 2 meters. Also, ventilation, up the ventilation a bit, keep your hand hygiene good, make sure that you're continue to disinfect and clean. Um, here's another question. Here's a good one. Where does it say in the law that I need fit testing if I wear an N95? Okay, there's a kind of obscure regulation. It's known as the Regulation 833 under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It's the regulation of biological and chemical agents. And in it, starting around Section 9, it sets all this out. And it says that if you are issued an N95 mask, a respirator, then it needs to be fit tested by somebody who's a qualified person to do so. Because, I mean, these masks are vital protective equipment. And if you don't fit them and seal them on your face, they're not doing the job that you're purchasing them to do, and you're not living up to the commitment to your workers that you promised. I should mention, go to e-laws and check out all the legislation there. Look under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It tells about the duties of employers and workers and supervisors and others, and your rights. And it also provides links from the Occupational Health and Safety Act to all the regulations that apply, including that Reg 833. Okay, take a look in there, Section 9 and 10. I'm a nurse at a hospital. My employer is following all public health directives, but some of my coworkers have tested positive. Can we request and receive a higher level of PPE? Well, the short answer is yes. Because remember, as we saw in the directive, it said that if you do a point of care assessment and you think in your professional opinion that an N95 is required, you need to get, you are entitled to access that and obtain it. The directive also says that if you're working with a suspected, presumed, or confirmed case, that you need to have access. So these are things that are, yes, you can, if you're getting a surgical mask, but you do that assessment, point of care assessment, and you feel that something further is needed, the hospital is required to give you access to an N95. I work in a hair salon. We're talking about reopening. What particular mask or respirator should I be requesting from my employer? Okay. Well, if Europe is any indication, the salon workers should be required to wear surgical masks. And something else that might be wise to consider is to ensure that this might be difficult, but again, your clients coming in are also breathing into the atmosphere. So they may only have a homemade mask, maybe they have a surgical mask you can provide to them, but whatever you provide to them will also ensure that the air that you breathe is somewhat filtered. Also, remember, turn up the ventilation. Let's get the air replaced with clean air from outside as often as possible. Further question. How does facial hair play in a good fit? Well, the answer is you're not going to get a good fit on an N95 or even a surgical mask if you have a beard. So men you should shave a beard if you're in a place where you require N95 or even a surgical mask. And frankly, you should do it, every day, because it makes a difference in terms of the amount of flow that might leak around the side. So shave, guys. Please explain further about the controversy with aerosols. Why do we not know about this by now? It certainly seems important. Well, I can't tell you why we don't know about this all. I can tell you that there continues to be a scientific controversy on this fact. It's known that some viruses, I believe tuberculosis and smallpox, can travel on, it's been proven, can travel on aerosols. And certainly SARS traveled on aerosols. That means that they traveled by the airborne route and have this difficulty of them as an aerosol drifting from place to place in a workplace. That's why they're so dangerous. Now, SARS is a coronavirus. The SARS virus is coronavirus. COVID-2 is also caused by coronavirus. In fact, they're cousins, or might be even closer than that. So there's some concern about this, and certainly some of the evidence from outbreaks points in the direction of something like this. So the question was, explain further the controversy. Okay, that's the controversy. Why is this important? The importance is that if breath or sneezes or coughs don't fall to the floor. If they become aerosols and this virus can still adhere to those small particles, if they don't die off once the particle dries and becomes small, 5 microns or less, if that is proven, then we're into a place where the N95 is more important, where ventilation is very important, and we realize that we're into a bit of a different situation. I hope I've answered that question as best I can. It's not something. It's something a little bit beyond my pay grade, unfortunately. Can ventilation systems transmit the virus? Well, again, this question relates to aerosols. Ventilation systems should bring fresh air in. Don't recirculate the air. If you're driving a cab, like the limo drivers at Pearson, and it's cold, maybe you've got the air recirculation on. So that doesn't seem to me to be a healthy practice. The safest practice certainly would be to always be ventilating your air. If you have an N95 and goggles, is a shield and N95 better? And is a level 1 shield as efficient as an N95 mask? These are great questions. Now, I'm going to have to do the research to do that, and we have a team who will look into that. All of the questions that don't get answered right now, and I'm not going to be able to answer this one, will be responded to you to your email address. And we're going to post all of the answers on our webpage so that you can look at all the questions, look at all the answers that were made today, and you can come through and you can look at the responses. So that's the time that we have allocated. Thanks very much. We'll have another one next Tuesday. And until there, I hope you can stay safe. Thank you.